let's see if we actually got it to work. It appears to be live. You're going to see me looking down at my computer to make sure it goes. I apologize. There seems to be a quirk between scheduling ahead and my computer liking to start. It will start or it will schedule ahead, but apparently it won't do both. So this week was an interesting week, and rather than focus on the things that I found very troubling, for example, Radcliffe being confirmed, I want to focus on the general principles behind that I find more troubling. If you have questions, please type them in the chat. I'm just going to keep talking until questions come up. So as far as what's happening is we have a lot of nominations that are coming up that are not getting probably the consideration that they deserve. So the United States House of Representatives has one real job. That real job is to make law. There's a lot of things associated with that. There's hearings, there's being a check and the balance. There's a lot they do, but really they're as a body, their job is making law. The Senate has a second job, and that is making sure that they review appointments for things like judges and cabinet members, and making sure that they are reviewing the people who are going in these high-level posts to make sure that they have basic knowledge, the ability to do things properly, that they are generally people of integrity, that they seem to care about our country. And unfortunately, that's something that has been slacking for a long time. I mean, things have been getting politicized for a long time. It's gotten worse in the most recent years, though. And so one of the things that frustrates me and has caused me to want to run for office is nations. And it really shouldn't matter which party is nominating. Those are really critical positions. So that doesn't mean that the threshold is so high that nobody should be able to attain it, but the threshold should be high. These are important positions. This is, positions where the national trust is entrusted to them. So I'm concerned that we don't seem to be taking this process seriously. I'm concerned that it has become a political sideshow. I don't think that that is appropriate as a way to appoint people. It shouldn't be, oh gosh, my party appointed them, so yeah, they're fine. Or, hey, I'll pick a token one or two to disagree with, but generally I'm just going to agree with all of them. That's not a great way to create a government that functions. And unfortunately, that seems to be the space that we're in. I'm going to adjust this just a little bit because my keyboard is at the very bottom. I apologize. When I purchased this computer, I did not anticipate ever needing a webcam. In fact, normally there's electrical tape over it, but now we're in a different world. So there is a very inconveniently located camera on this particular computer. And apparently everybody is starting to do podcasts and videos. And so audio and video equipment is a little challenging to acquire right now. So one of the things that I find exceedingly frustrating, excuse me, I'm going to turn off a notification, is that we're just not paying attention to the process. And we're not paying that attention to the process when we're confirming people, not just for positions, but for judges. We're getting some very questionable judges in. There have been quite a few judges that have been reviewed by the ABA, American Bar Association, which is a nonpartisan organization. I've been a member of that organization. I've actually held positions in that organization. It's not particularly left or right leaning. It is a organization that just supports attorneys in general competence. They provide a lot of continuing education. They have conferences so we can continue to advance ourselves. It's a good organization. It's meant to make sure attorneys stay healthy in a variety of ways. And so to be rated by them as a judge as unqualified is actually a really big deal and pretty embarrassing. Like if I were put up for a federal judgeship and I was rated unqualified, I would be too embarrassed to show up. I mean, that is an embarrassing thing. You shouldn't be proud of being rated not qualified. And we most certainly shouldn't be appointing judges that are not qualified. A lot of attention is placed on the Supreme Court, and those are very important rules. That should be the highest standard we apply to any judge anywhere. But a lot of decisions are actually made at the lower court level and don't make it up to Supreme Court. They just simply cannot take every case that goes to them, unfortunately. Or maybe fortunately, that would be an awful lot of things to keep an eye on. So all of those lower judges that are installed, they also should have the same critical eye. They're making decisions that impact certainly their own areas, but also they can be applied nationally. Even if it's not binding law, it's still something that, for example, if I write a brief to our law court in Maine, which is the highest court here, it's the highest court in the state of Maine. If I write a brief and our law doesn't have everything that it needs, or maybe I disagree with it, I'll look at cases across the country, either generally that have been appealed, and see what the holdings are and see if those holdings apply to the point I'm trying to make to the law court. So those decisions, even if it's not in your state or your circuit, those decisions do apply to other cases, even if it's not binding law. So it's not something that's necessarily just regional. It's something that's very important. And right now we have a lot of people who aren't attorneys that don't understand how that impacts people. And it's almost like how I used to vote in my 20s. So in my 20s, I wasn't an attorney. I didn't even have a full high school education. I didn't graduate from high school. I didn't have a GED. I didn't go to college until I was 27. And in my early 20s, I would get a ballot. I was always registered to vote, and I voted for presidents. But we had all these other elections, and sometimes I would find myself in the voting booth and I would end up not voting for someone, or even worse, voting for somebody I wasn't totally confident in, but I didn't have enough information. And I think that's really common before you start to get politically engaged, to just sort of be a casual voter. And right now it seems like a lot of our judges and justices and appointments that we're appointing for, we're giving just that very casual, gosh, I think I heard their name on a commercial, or so-and-so said they were fine. We're just doing that level of checking in a lot of cases, and that's not a way to build a government or a judiciary. So that really bothers me. If you have any questions, I do have live chat on. Please type questions. I'm happy to answer them. Do know that there is like a 30-second to 2-minute-ish lag. And if it looks like I'm looking all over, my camera is here. If I'm looking at myself, it's here. And if I'm checking to see if anybody's watching, it's way up there. So I apologize if my eyes are all over this. This computer was probably not designed to do this sort of thing. So we're making do, because that's what we have. So I do get very bothered at our appointments. I get very bothered at how little depth we put into them. And I think that's a factor of two things. I think there's two main things that cause that. And the first one is, we're just really partisan and don't care as a country, which is a problem. So we've got a lot of people that we almost make decisions in lawmaking where we're looking for who's against it more than who's for it. It's almost like if the other side doesn't like it, it must be great. And that is not a good way to legislate or pick judges. Instead of somebody who's one of our colleagues doesn't like a nominee, we should ask why and investigate that. And I don't think that's what we're getting right now. I think that if, a Democrat or a Republican doesn't like somebody, then the other party tends to go, oh, you don't like this person. And we're seeing that right now with the Republicans because they happen to be the ones in the majority. But it's almost as if a Democrat raises a flag and says, hey, this is a problem. I really have an issue with this person's history or some article they wrote or some group they're a member of. It's almost like the reaction is to like them more from a lot of Republican senators right now, instead of say, well, maybe we should be looking for people who are not obviously partisan or biased, and maybe we should dig a little deeper into that, because gosh, if it were a Democrat that was making the appointment and they had an extremely liberal bend, I'd find that concerning. And so I want to extend the same grace that we're not doing that in our judiciary, but that's not the world we're in. So the hyperpartisanship, I think, really lends itself to people not paying enough attention to the nominations, or actually using it as a point of pride to vote for them. But also I think it's a money, and the money has two forks. So fork one with the money is it pays. There's a lot of campaign donations based on judiciary, based on voting for bills and nominees that are wanted. There is a lot of profit to be had and fundraising to be had off of it. I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think we should have that in government. I think we should be really restricting how and when people can take resources, financial resources, when they're doing that. It also has a lot to do with their own stock portfolios. If you're voting for somebody that you know is going to make a not great decision, but it will financially advantage you. We've seen this year some insider trading going on, where it's, we have legislators that are making decisions about their own investments based on either law that's coming or information that's coming that they found out first, that's a matter of national security, like the COVID issue, or, they know a particular ruling is likely to come down because they've installed that judge. There's a huge conflict there. The other part of the money is the amount of money that that is required to be in office is enormous. So the first quarter of this year, we had about $10 million raised in the main Senate race across all the candidates. And that's a lot of money, right? If you are fundraising and you need $1 million and you have a whole year to get it, and you work 50 weeks of the year because maybe you take a couple weeks off for vacation, a 40-hour-a-week job to get $1 million is $500 an hour. That's a lot of fundraising. And if you are so busy fundraising, you just simply are not going to have time. You are not going to have the time necessary to do the proper vetting. You're not going to have the time to look through things that have been put into synopsis for you, even if you had the time to do the proper vetting. And that's very problematic. Whether if you don't even have time to do the Cliff Notes reading, that is an issue that is going to pop up that makes it so you can't do your job. So right now we have a Congress where they can either choose to work on doing the money and fundraising and put their attention towards that to keep their job, or they can do the work. And there's really not the time to do both. There's really not the time to raise millions of dollars. One candidate raised over $7 million in the first quarter, and there's just not the time to do almost anything but that when you're talking about that level of money. So we really need to be making sure we find ways to get money out of politics. Now, I've come up with main raising. Obviously, that's sort of an eclectic thing that's going to apply to not a whole bunch of candidates at the beginning. It's a different model that works. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other ways we can do it as far as changing the structure of it. Unfortunately, to change the structure, we are probably, there's a lag in the video. I hope you guys aren't seeing as much of that as I am. You're going to need more people who got to Washington, D.C. without money to have the political will to make those changes. Right now, I think it's very popular to say, oh my gosh, I don't like Citizens United. Oh my gosh, I hate all this money in politics. But they still accept it and they still take it. So one of the things that's just totally awesome about the main Senate race is it's a ranked choice vote. So we have the ability, I think the vast majority of voters, whether or not I would be their first candidate, I think the vast majority of voters in Maine would say, oh my gosh, she's reasonable. I don't agree with her on everything, but she's reasonable. She seems to care, and she really nerds out on federal law in a way that I don't necessarily want to hear in great detail. And they can make the choice to say, what I don't like is the money. And so I'm willing to cast my first vote for somebody who, even if they're not perfect, they are the person who has refused to take any money at all. And if there is a Senate race that's run in the country on no money and it wins, that would be enough to start saying, we don't need this money. We get to do something politically amazing. We can say, $1,000, $500. I've spent a little over $500. I've had to have higher costs on postage because of the pandemic. But if we said, hey, somebody ran an entire Senate campaign or $1,000 or $2,000 and they didn't need the millions and they won, that would be a phenomenal way to shift how politics works, to say, you don't need it. So let's find ways to get it out. So I think that's something that's really important. It's something that I would like to see us focus on, is truly finding ways to get money out of elections. And again, you're going to have to get people to DC without money to have that happen. If you're watching and you've heard of anybody else around the country doing things that I don't know about to get money out of politics, I would love to hear about it. I think it's something that is a national problem. I think we should be collaborating on it. I think we should be finding ways to promote reasonable candidates that don't go for the money the same way everybody else does. And really, who likes getting all those emails begging on a daily basis for money that you don't necessarily have to give? So the other things that I saw this week, we have a disappointing number of deaths. It is heartbreaking and overwhelming to see the amount of people that passed away from COVID. We're closing in on 100,000 people just in the United States, and that is most likely a very undercounted number because it's not counting people who, in most cases, died at home, didn't have a test. So, I think when this is all said and done, we'll have to go back and look at historical death numbers, and I think that it's probably going to be substantially higher. But every one of those numbers, that was a person. Those were people's fathers and mothers and daughters, and it is heartbreaking that our legislators just don't seem to care. There are a few that care, but generally it just doesn't seem to impact people when they say the number out loud. That's really upsetting. So this upcoming week is a holiday. We can't go a whole lot of places. We are still trying to make ballot. If you are in the Portland, Maine area, I will have a table out today and most days. If you are anywhere in Maine, there are signature gatherers all over that will meet you in a safe and healthy way to be able to get your signature. Please sign up. And if there is anything else you need from me, I'm on Twitter. You can find me. I feel like I'm chatting with myself a little bit here, and I'm not sure if we have an issue with the text chat or not. I will try testing that again for next week, and we'll try next week. We may also be adding a weekly town hall. It looks like Tuesdays is the day everybody wants. So keep an eye out for that, and I will see you guys when I am out of my PJs.